You're listening to Psych with Mike. And remember, the book, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, has a ton more information in it that is corollary to the things that we talk about here on Psych with Mike. So pick up a copy and leave us a review on Amazon. That is super helpful. Subscribe to Psych with Mike on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts, and leave us a review on Apple if you would like, and that really helps out the show. And now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. I am your host, Dr. Michael Mahan. When I was in graduate school, one of the very first things that we learned about was something called a tennis ball exercise. And this was to enhance and promote better communication. And we actually used this exercise in class to try and help us understand what it was like to be in a room with another person and them pouring out to you some of their most closely guarded secrets, some of their most heartfelt pain, and sitting there and giving all of that away. And then what do they get back? And hopefully what they get back is a sense of unconditional positive regard, and hopefully a belief that the therapist understands what they're talking about. But we can also apply this to couples, we can apply it to friends, you can basically apply it to anything in life, because really all of our lives is about communication. So how do we improve communication? One of the best ways to do that is to demonstrate to the individual that you are communicating with that you actually hear and understand their message. You don't have to agree with their message necessarily, but being able to convey an understanding and an appreciation of the message is essential for feeling connected. So the tennis ball exercise, the rules go like this. You have an object, and in my office, we don't have a tennis ball. I don't keep a tennis ball in my office. I usually use a pen. It doesn't matter what the object is, but the object allows the individual speaking to speak uninterruptedly, meaning that the only person who can speak while the exercise is going on is the person holding the object. So we're going to say, in this case, a pen. I have the pen, I get to talk. When I get done speaking, I hand the pen to you, and then you get to reply, but before you reply, you have to repeat back to me what I said to my satisfaction. And that's going to make a lot more sense in just a few minutes when we start talking about examples. But what this does is a couple of things, really. Number one, it helps us to be mindful of not talking over each other. We tend to, as human beings, anticipate what we're going to say in response to what our partner is saying, and we actually create a dialogue, a responsive dialogue, even while they're speaking. And what may end up happening is that even before they're finished completing their thought, we are already responding. It is extremely difficult for you to genuinely understand what the other person is saying if you are busy concocting a response in your own mind, and especially if you are going to deliver that response before they even get done speaking. And on their end, they don't feel heard or understood because it appears that you're much more intentional about creating and delivering your own response rather than actually paying attention to their message. So they feel discounted and upset that they don't get an opportunity to actually complete a thought. So we go back to the tennis ball exercise. In class, we would actually practice this where someone would have a tennis ball, they would say something, they would hand the tennis ball to their partner, and their partner would have to report back to them, respond back to them what they said to their satisfaction before they themselves could deliver their response. And the way that this works in practice can be incredibly emotionally powerful. The first job that I ever had in psychology, really the only job that I've ever had other than being in private practice, was working in a hospital. I started working in a hospital in St. Louis way back in the early 1980s, maybe even the end of the 1970s. But I worked there for 20 years before I went into private practice. I got my undergraduate, well, actually, I got my high school diploma, I got my undergraduate degree, and I got my graduate degree all while I was working at the hospital. And so by the end of my tenure there, I was a therapist in a treatment center called Highland Center, which was back in the 1970s a very well-known, very well-respected, worldwide respected treatment center here in St. Louis. And as a function of that job, I would do Family Week and Family Weekend. And one year I was doing Family Week, and we were talking about communication, and it was between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was after Thanksgiving, but it wasn't quite yet Christmas, and it was cold enough outside that it was snowing. And so I'm doing this group on I think it was a Sunday afternoon. People are wanting to go home. We're doing this group on communication, and I had an older gentleman who was in the treatment center for alcoholism, and his wife was attending the Family Week with him. And we were doing this communication exercise. And so they went ahead and volunteered to be a demonstration for this communication exercise. And so I handed the pen to the wife. I explained what the rules of the communication exercise were. I handed the pen to the wife, and she said, "I really hope that it stops snowing before I leave because I'm afraid to drive home in the snow." And so she hands the pen to her husband, and he says to her, "Well, I don't understand, why you don't want to drive home in the snow. It's really not that big a deal. You really ought to be worried about." And I stopped him, and I said to her, "Is that what you said? Do you believe that that was the message that you conveyed?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, that's not what I heard, so I'm wondering if we could do this again to see if we could all maybe get on the same page." So he hands the pen back to her. She repeats almost verbatim, "I hope it stops snowing before I have to leave because I'm afraid to drive home in the snow." And she hands the pen back to him, and he starts talking about their daughter. And I said, "Is that what you said to him?" And she again said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, that's not what I heard. I think the message may be different. And it's nuanced, but I think it's important. So can we try again?" And we did this several times until everybody in the room was exasperated. The guy was upset. The woman I could tell from the look on her face that she didn't think that this was ever going to go anywhere. And so finally, on about the 9th time, he hands the pen back to her. She says, "I hope it stops snowing before I have to leave because I'm afraid to drive home in the snow." She hands the pen back to her husband, and he said, "I think you're afraid to drive in the snow." And she started bawling because it was the first time in her life with him, which had been long, that she ever felt like he took the time to listen, to understand, and to be able to repeat back to her the message that she was sending to him. Communication is all we have as human beings to be able to interact with each other, both through our verbal message and our nonverbal. And you've heard me talk 100 times about the significance and importance importance of nonverbal behavior, but a part of the communication are the spoken words. And when we create preconceived expectations of what the people around us are saying, so much so that we create dialogues and scripts. She's going to say this, I'm going to say this, then she's going to say this, then I'm going to say this, which break down after the first interaction. But we do this over and over and over again. And when we don't feel heard and we don't feel understood, we get frustrated. And the reason is because we don't take the time to practice genuinely being able to hear what the other person is saying so completely that we could recite it back to them to their satisfaction. This is a great exercise. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you communicate with. If you practice this, I guarantee you your communication will improve. But more importantly, the sense of connection that you have with people in your life is going to exponentially explode, because this kind of communication is exactly what all of us are looking for. Remember, we have a book out, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human. We would love for you to pick up a copy. I will leave a link in the description below. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.